animal interests. For example, one criticism was against the Holocaust on Your Plate campaign, in which animals in the factory farm were compared to Jews in concentration camps in World War II. The Anti-Defamation League claimed that comparing the slaughter of animals for human consumption to the murder of millions of Jews drastically downplays the meaning and moral repugnance of the Holocaust, and this caused PETA to cease the advertising campaign and to apologize. PETA then launched the Are the Animals the New Slaves campaign, which is a similar campaign which included images of penned and chained animals juxtaposed with pictures of black slaves, Native Americans, and child laborers. The NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, criticized the campaign, which was then suspended. PETA is also criticized because of its tolerance of violence. It has tolerated activists that break the law and has been affiliated with organizations like the Animal Liberation Front that advocate violence and vandalism to achieve animal liberation. It's worth pointing out that the Animal Liberation Front is considered a terrorist organization by the government of the United States. Ingrid Newkirk makes no apology for PETA's support of activists who may break the law, writing that no movement for social change has ever succeeded without the, quote, militarism component. Such attitudes, critics assert, detract from the legitimacy of the actions of PETA. PETA was also involved in the Silver Spring monkey case, which occurred right here in Silver Spring, Maryland. In 1981, PETA staged an undercover investigation inside a primate research laboratory in Silver Spring, Maryland. The researcher, Dr. Edward Taub, had cut sensory ganglia that supplied nerves to the monkey's fingers, hands, arms, and legs, a process called deafferentation. And as a result of deafferentation, monkeys could not feel these fingers, hands, arms, or legs. But he then used restraint, electric shock, and the withholding of food and water to force the monkeys to use the deafferented parts of their bodies. The aim was to determine whether the monkeys could be forced to use the limbs and whether this had an effect on the structure of their brains. A PETA activist visited the laboratory at night and took photographs and turned them over to the police, who raided the lab and arrested Taub. Taub was convicted of 6 counts of animal cruelty, the first such conviction in the United States of a research scientist. The battle over custody of some of the monkeys lasted 10 years, triggered an amendment in 1985 to the Animal Welfare Act to ensure that researchers do not cause unnecessary suffering to laboratory animals. But it's worth pointing out that Taub's research resulted in therapeutically important treatment for human beings. So human beings who are the victims of stroke have benefited from this research conducted on animals. People that were prior to these discoveries unable to walk and so on came to be understood that they could be taught to walk, taught to move limbs damaged by stroke, etc. So it was not research without purpose. The Act, the Animal Welfare Act, brought into force in 1966, had as its primary goal the treatment of animals for sale, the prohibition of dogfighting, and the regulation of the transportation of animals. It also now requires that every research institution have an IACUC, an Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, to supervise animal research and ensure that animal suffering is minimized. And again, Taub's research led to the development of the concept of neuroplasticity, the idea that the brain can rewire itself after it is damaged, and a new physical therapy for stroke victims called constraint-induced movement therapy. After the controversy, Taub went on to develop constraint-induced movement therapy and has helped stroke survivors regain the use of limbs paralyzed for many years. This has been hailed by the American Stroke Association as at the forefront of a revolution. In summary, Alternative approaches are emerging that argue for increased involvement of animal rights activists in the meat-eating culture, not as obstructionists, but as participants in guiding meat-eating practices. Roger Scruton, for example, in his essay, A Carnivore's Credo, says that if meat eating is left up to the people who don't care what happens to meat or to animals, then animals will continue to be treated poorly. He notices that whenever someone becomes food conscious, they tend to become a vegetarian, and he thinks that this is the wrong way to go. If instead people are food conscious and they remain meat eaters, they'll effectively vote with their dollars and increase the number of free-range chicken, free-range beef, animals that aren't raised in the horrible conditions of the factory farm, that aren't given antibiotics, etc. This will increase the profitability and therefore the number of businesses that are attentive to the issues of animal welfare. In your textbook, please further investigate these issues by reading an excerpt from Singer's book, Animal Liberation. It can be found in the author and Scalant text under the title, All Animals Are Created Equal. Bonnie Steinbach's essay, in which she challenges this notion of speciesism, is also in the Scalant text, Arthur and Scalant text. For some interesting details on a Supreme Court ruling on the use of animals in religious ceremonies, see the case of the Church of the Lukumi Babalu Ai versus the City of Hialeah in the Van Camp text. And now that you've completed the lecture for this module, please review the relevant coursework, review questions, discussion posts, and your journal entry. For the review questions and journal entry, click on the Assignments tab on the left-hand side of WebCT. For your discussion post, click on the Discussions tab on the left-hand side of WebCT. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed talking about animals and different views on our ethical obligations concerning them, and please contact me with any questions.